to save that child's life.
So that's why this 5-second buddy check rule is so crucially important.
Yes.
Because that's in the moment where we can still make a difference.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Josh, back to this idea of systems. I want to talk a little bit about how we put our guards and our counselors in a position where they can win in an outdoor environment where the sun is up and there's glare on the water all the time. Is there a way to manage? You spent an awful lot of years running camps. Well, not that many years, but a fair number of years running camps. How do you manage the system or the flow of the day in such a way to give us a chance to win at the waterfront?
I think you have to look at your individual pool and what are the times or the waterfront where there's glare right in the eyes of the lifeguard or where you're positioning the lifeguard. And we got to set it up so that we can be successful, so that we're not having sun glaring down on the water or you can't see the bottom of the pool. That's not the right time to swim. If we can't find a safe spot, then we got to move the swim time. During the summer, there are long days in most places where the sun's out and you have a lot of hours. Let's pick the right ones. And it's also important, how long we have our guards working. Mm-hmm. It's a hot, long summer. We need to make sure we're keeping our guards hydrated, that they're getting breaks, so they have a chance to be successful.
So probably shouldn't have swim time at a time when the sun is low in the sky.
Right.
That makes sense. So we're almost to the close of this section, and I suspect we've covered an awful lot of the things that were talked about in the group discussion. But it seems to me there's something we haven't really gotten to. We've talked about what the guards are supposed to do on the pool deck and what the counselors are supposed to do on the pool deck and how to create systems that give each of them the opportunity to win, to recognize a swimmer in distress as quickly as possible, whether in a natural body of water or in a pool. But there's an interaction here that seems to me to be a part of collective responsibility, which is a significant theme of camp, right? What's the counselor's responsibility on the pool deck with regard to keeping the guards accountable?
Well, in addition to watching the children and doing the responsibilities for keeping the campers safe, the counselors are responsible for making sure the lifeguards are doing their jobs as well. If the lifeguard is not in the proper position, if the lifeguard's distracted, if the lifeguard is not actively scanning, then the counselor should not put their kids in that water. There's no swim time until it can be fixed. But that works both ways. The lifeguards, in addition to scanning, in addition to making sure that they're alert, if the lifeguards see that the counselors are not enforcing the rules, if they're not actively supervising the campers in the water, then the lifeguards blow their whistles and tell everybody to get out until it's fixed.
So the guard has full responsibility for the pool. If things are not happening the way they should be happening, the guard effectively closes the pool and clears it and says we're going to have to do things differently. If the counselor sees that things aren't being done the way they need to be done so that their campers are not safe, the counselor says, my kids aren't going in this water. Now, I want us to take just a second because from time to time, specifically for day camps or more often for day camps, we may be taking our kids to a pool that's not our pool, a county pool or whatever the case might be. So, Josh, just help me with this. I'm now a lead counselor. I've got 40 kids on a bus. I'm taking them to the pool. Of course, it's the hottest day of the summer. Of course, there's been no rain or rest of whatever kind for weeks on end, and our kids are dying to get in this water. And I'm going to get there and I'm going to find that the lifeguards are not doing a good enough job for me. What do I do?
We do another activity. As much as the kids are going to complain, if we can't win if the lifeguards aren't watching the water. And if we show up at a pool that's at a county park or a water park and they're not doing their jobs, we do something else.
So let's just be clear about this. We want to be sure that the rules for our guards on our pools or our natural bodies of water, when we're responsible, are that the guards are properly positioned, properly equipped, scanning properly. All those rules are being enforced all the time. If we go to another place to swim, all of those rules are still in place. Regardless of whether they're our guards or someone else's guards, we expect them to behave in a way that's consistent with our standards. And if that's not what's going on that pool deck or on that natural body of water, our kids don't go in that water. Is that what you're saying, guys?
Absolutely.
Yes, and the water is the most popular place you're going to have this summer, whether it be at your lake or your pool or on a field trip. But we have to realize that the water is also the most dangerous place that your kids are going to be in this summer. And if we can't put all of these layers of protection in place, then no one goes swimming.
So there's no better way to end this segment, Gareth. Thank you for that. The pool, the waterfront, the most popular place at your camp, and by far the most dangerous place. We have to be vigilant at all times, but never more vigilant than when our kids are in the water. We have a lot of tough ground to cover today, but the stories you're about to hear are as tough as any you will ever hear. The data tells us that 1 in 4 girls who turn 18 in the United States this year will have been sexually abused. 1 in 6 boys. 100,000 children will be sexually abused in the United States this year. Those are devastating numbers, and what they say about us as a society is deeply discouraging. An awful lot of the relationships that ultimately lead to the sexual abuse of children begin with adults in trusting positions of great power. That's how adults get access to kids. Some of those relationships happen at camp. Some of those relationships could begin at your camp this summer. We know how to stop child sexual abuse. We know how to stop it because there's a pattern that a predator uses to get access to kids that is repeated time after time. That pattern gives us the opportunity to recognize the warning signs of child sexual abuse and gives us the opportunity to stop the abuse from progressing or even from occurring in the first place. The stories that you're about to hear are stories just like that, where an adult used his position of power and trust to get access to kids that ultimately resulted in horrific activities. Listen to these stories. Think about how your role as a camp counselor, done properly, could have stopped this abuse from happening. Then visit with your colleagues and chat about how these situations might present themselves at your camp this summer and what you might do to prevent them. We're enlisting you as a volunteer in a revolution to eradicate child sexual abuse in America. And that revolution begins at your camp this summer.
Over the past few years, we've investigated dozens of cases of adult-to-child sexual abuse, really way too many, and many of those happening at camp. One example is a 18-year-old honors student who had been a camper at camp, had now moved up to camp counselor, so everybody knew him. And he would, every week of camp, pick out one of his favorite boys, usually around 12 years old, that he would show special attention to. He would single out from the rest of the group. He became friends with them on Facebook. And it turns out that over the course of 4 weeks during that summer, he sexually abused 2 children, touching their genitals at times before bed and on the bus when there were other people around, but it was very hard to supervise. And we also recently investigated the case of a camp director. Now, this camp director lived on campus, on the center of the camp. His residence was actually connected to the dining hall. And what he had done was blacked out the windows of his residence so that no one could see in there. Now, I know that sounds strange, and kind of the red flags go up immediately, but he gave a reason for it that people accepted because they trusted him. The reason was, this is my residence, this is where I live, just like hanging curtains or blinds, I need to have my privacy. So people accepted that. Unfortunately, what the privacy allowed him to do was to break some other rules at camp. He would have visitors over, campers. And when he came over, he had the opportunity to give them alcohol, to show them pornography, to break down their barriers, and to eventually sexually abuse the children when he was in a one-on-one situation with them. There was a camp counselor and camp director who over the course of about 10 years worked for 3 different camps. And over that time, he would gain the trust of vulnerable children, he would gain the trust of their parents, he would gain the trust of his supervisors and all of the coworkers. Not until about, I said, 10 years after working in camp, he was finally arrested for charges of child pornography. And there was a lot of suspicion that during his time, the children that he was spending more time with, he may have been sexually abusing.
So one story that I'm really close to, my first year as an executive camp director, made it to the last day of summer and was sitting in my office right after the last kid left and had my assistant directors saying, wow, it was challenging but a great summer, nothing really bad had happened, or so we had thought. And then my phone rang, and it was a mother who called me to tell me that her son had just come home, and the first thing he did was tell her that his counselor, Miguel, would touch him as he put him to sleep each night in his private areas. My first reaction was to say, I can't believe it. Miguel was one of our best counselors. I tried to assure the mom, maybe she needed to go back and talk to her son just because couldn't be. Miguel had worked at camp for 2 years, was an international staff counselor, and until that call, I had always thought he was one of my best staff members. He had spent almost all of his free time with kids. He'd be at break time and he wouldn't need the break. He would be hanging out at the tennis courts or the tetherball courts and talking with kids. I'd catch his co-counselor sometimes. The staff were allowed to have a break at 10 o'clock at night, and sometimes I would see his co-counselors at 9:30, and I said, what are you doing? And they say, well, Miguel said he'll put the kids to bed for me, so I had a little extra time. All of the time thinking that was the right thing. And Miguel was doing all these extra things as kind of what we want from our staff. Unfortunately, he was touching kids. To make it worse, as we started our investigation, we sent letters out to the campers in his cabin from both summers. After the first summer, as a lot of international staff do, they stayed in the United States to travel. And he went from camper's house to camper's house, where there were times where he was left alone babysitting kids. And some really horrific things happened. So while we certainly want to trust our staff, we also have to know what to look for. And what we do know about abusers is oftentimes they not only do they groom the child, I certainly was groomed. I believed in Miguel, and I was wrong.
These are difficult stories to hear and difficult circumstances to imagine, but I'm certain that what you just got through in your conversation was a renewed understanding that these kinds of things can happen at your camp without the right kinds of protections. This has been an interesting time in the history of child sexual abuse prevention. Jerry Sandusky was a monster and is paying the price now. And coming on the heels, as it did, of all the years of the news about the Catholic Church, it feels to me, Josh, like maybe if there's anything good that could have come out of last year's news, that maybe the awareness of a nation has reached a tipping point, that we understand that this can and does happen, and that we have to do things differently. Am I being overly hopeful?
I hope not. I think it's time. I think with all the events you shared, there's a Jerry Sandusky in every community. He just doesn't happen to be the head football coach or assistant football coach at Penn State. And I think people are now aware of that. And they're wanting to know what they can do to protect their kids. Mm-hmm. And I think we're called to help share the answers.
Well, so the answers involve understanding how it happens, right? Because most of us, our challenge is we think, how could this happen? How could somebody be so sick as to want to have sex with children? It's impossible for us to understand. Yet, Gareth, in the stories that we've told, and in all of the data that we know about the hundreds of thousands of times that this happens, 100,000 times a year in our country, there appears to be a very clear pattern to what happens. Can you walk us through that pattern?
Yes, that pattern's known as the grooming process. And what we know